Good day, good people, and welcome to Revolutionary Belovedness. I'm Robert Farrell, the founder and spiritual director of Contemplative Inner Being. Whether you are watching the live session or enjoying the recording, we're very grateful that you are here. I even noticed that there are a couple of new people joining us for the live session. So thank you for being here. The chat section remains open during the whole session. So at any time you can say hi or ask a question or share something that's coming up for you as we go through our evening together. If you will, let me know in the chat section that you are hearing me okay. And I think maybe, there we go. Very nice. Tonight's session is on the wisdom of limits and restraint. It's about learning how boundaries, restraint, and enoughness serve both love and justice. And what I would tell you before we get into this, our theme this year is Revolutionary Belovedness, and we are drawing this year on the teachings of Valerie Kaur, Richard Rohr, and Wayne Teasdale. We'll sprinkle in some others along the way, but Wayne Teasdale has taught about interspirituality, a universal spirituality. And Richard Rohr talks about the 9 principles of a contemplative life. So let's take a moment to settle in, to be here now, to breathe and be in our presence. Settle into the weight of your body. Feel the surface beneath you, solid and patient, receiving you fully. Allow the breath to arrive on its own terms, full and unhurried, rising and releasing without your management. Tonight's session asks something of us that the world seldom does. It asks us to consider that limits are a form of wisdom, that restraint is a form of love, and that the word enough carries within it depth we are only beginning to fathom. So let's sit with just that for a moment. Let the breath come and go. Let enough be enough. Right here, right now. In this body, in this room, in this gathered company. You have arrived. This is the starting place. Friends, as you settle into this heart space, let that be the place from which you listen. And again, the chat section is open. So if at any time something comes to you you'd like to share, whether it's a reflection, maybe you want to echo a phrase that you heard, maybe you want to share your own insight or ask a question, that's quite fine. We will find ways to weave it in together to interbe. First, I'm going to take probably 12 to 15 minutes to share a reflection, and then we're going to move into a guided inquiry, a guided meditation together. Then we'll explore 4 guiding questions to kind of deepen your reflection, and let that be how we close the evening. Friends, there is a teaching embedded in the ancient world's understanding of virtue that has nearly disappeared from contemporary life. The teachers of antiquity call moderation one of the 4 cardinal values, the hinge virtues upon which all other moral and spiritual qualities depend. Temperance, prudence, justice, and fortitude were understood as the foundations of a well-ordered soul and a well-ordered society. What strikes us looking back with fresh eyes is how much these virtues demand. They demand a life shaped by proportion rather than accumulation, directed by the deep wisdom of knowing when enough has arrived rather than by endless reaching. And that knowing is itself a spiritual achievement, one that requires formation, practice, and a willingness to see the world differently than the surrounding culture invites us to see it. Now, Father Richard Rohr, writing from the Franciscan stream of Christian mysticism, returns to this question throughout his teaching life. Franciscan spirituality is grounded in what might be called the school of descent, the conviction that spiritual maturity grows downward, toward simplicity, toward smallness, toward a kind of holy poverty that reveals rather than diminishes the soul. Francis of Assisi gave away everything precisely because he had caught a vision of what was truly real. And the vision preceded the action. Keep that in mind. The imagination made the freedom possible. This movement from seeing to living, from imagining to embodying, is the very movement that Valerie Kaur names when she calls us to reimagine the assumptions we carry about what constitutes a full and worthy life, beginning with the assumption that more is always better. To reimagine is one of Valerie Kaur's 9 spiritual practices in revolutionary love. To reimagine is to exercise a disciplined spiritual faculty. It's the capacity to see beyond what currently exists toward what could exist, recognizing that the structures that shape human life are arrangements. They are maintained by habit, they're maintained by assumption, and they're always subject to transformation in the light of a larger love. Kaur insists that genuine and lasting change requires a prior act of seeing. The Franciscan path and the practice of reimagining converge here. You see, the imagination must be reformed before the life can be reformed. This is the creative and courageous act at the center of what we are talking about tonight. Using the spiritual imagination to see limits, to see restraint, to see enough as bearers of their own spiritual wealth. Discovering in that new seeing a ground from which a more generous and just world can grow. Friends, what makes that discovery demanding is the power of the world we have inherited. The world, as presently arranged, is organized almost entirely by the logic of more. More growth, more consumption, more productivity, more acquisition, more speed. But this is the logic of the ego, which Richard Rohr describes with remarkable precision. You see, the ego functions as a kind of hungry ghost, always reaching, always acquiring, because its appetite is rooted in the anxiety of insufficiency rather than in genuine need. A womb that deepens the more urgently it seeks to be filled. It reaches for more because it has yet to discover that enough exists. And so the cycle continues, self-reinforcing until something pauses within us and turns toward a different question altogether. That pause begins with a single word: enough. To ask what the soul actually requires, what communities genuinely need in order to flourish, what the earth offers when approached with reverence rather than extraction, that is to begin practicing a form of spiritual perception that the great traditions have always prized. Wayne Teasdale, reflecting on what the world's mystical traditions share in common, identifies simplicity of life as one of the essential marks of authentic spiritual development. The person who lives in genuine spiritual depth always carries an orientation toward the unadorned, toward the essential, toward freedom from everything extraneous. Gandhi gave this teaching its most memorable shape. The earth holds enough for every human need, he said, while human greed reaches always beyond what any earth can provide. These are questions that mature over time, deepening with practice, growing more spacious the longer they are held with sincerity. The word enough is worth dwelling within on its own terms. In the ordinary grammar of contemporary culture, enough functions as a ceiling, a reluctant concession, barely enough, just enough, at least enough. Something shifts when enough becomes a threshold of sacred recognition. Enough becomes the name of a quality of presence, a quality of arrival, a recognition that what is real and good and worth protecting has already been given. And friends, this is a contemplative insight before it is a political one, rooted in the simple and radical trust that the sacred is already present in the ordinary, that what is needed is available, and that the reaching for more is often the very thing that obscures what is already here. It already obscures what is already here. Richard Rohr helps us again. His teaching on the container and its contents carries this wisdom into a different register, and it deepens it. Every great vision requires a proper vehicle. A vision that outgrows its container spills out, becoming vague, distorted, unrecognizable. The limit is what makes the content coherent. The boundary is what allows the wine to exist at all. When limits are understood this way, as the condition of genuine vitality, the entire horizon of what limits can mean begins to open. A life that's ordered by endless expansion disperses its energies too broadly for anything to take on full definition and weight. The river, well, it needs its banks in order to move with power and direction. The musical rest needs its silence in order to give the note its full weight. And sitting with that image opens the question this session tonight most wants to press. What becomes possible when we reimagine the limit as a gift rather than as a diminishment? Friends, that reimagining is precisely what the revolutionary love practice invites. To reimagine restraint is to do more than turn away from the culture of more. It is to declare with imagination and intention that a life of limits holds its own fullness and dignity. Valerie Cord teaches us that we need to do more than resist. We need to reimagine the world. The reimagining required here is interior as much as it is political, because it asks us to envision a self ordered by sacred proportion. It asks us to envision a community shaped by mutual sufficiency, and a world in which taking less is understood as one of the most generous acts a human being can offer. So, to attempt to put it plainly, can we see enoughness as spiritual fullness in its own right? Can we see the boundary as an act of love? Can we receive the limit as a sacred invitation to inhabit more deeply what we already have? Restraint as a spiritual practice unfolds at every scale of human life, and at each scale it carries the same essential quality of love made concrete. When a person chooses restraint in the realm of consumption, they are choosing the freedom to be more fully present to what is already available. And in that choice, they release into the commons something the others also need. When a community chooses restraint in the exercise of power, it is enacting a vision of mutual dignity, a recognition that the flourishing of one depends on the flourishing of all. When a society begins to organize itself around the logic of enough, it is translating a contemplative insight into social architecture, making visible in shared life what the mystic has always known in prayer. Friends, the contemplative and the civic dimensions of restraint grow together. That's why we practice and act. Action and contemplation. because each of them is giving the other depth and durability over time. So, the cardinal virtue of temperance, recovered through this contemplative lens, reveals itself as something far more luminous than mere self-control. Temperance, understood this way, is the willingness to remain in right relationship with what is real, to take what genuinely nourishes, and to release the rest back into the commons, to trust that the world holds enough when approached with an open hand rather than a clenched fist. This is a virtue that resists formula. And it requires ongoing discernment, ongoing prayer, ongoing conversation with the living reality of one's own depths and one's community's wisdom. The questions it asks remain always alive. What does enough look like in this moment, with these people, in this place, given what the world most needs from us now? My hope is that this session tonight ultimately is a contemplative transformation in how limits are perceived and received. The invitation, my friends, is to see boundaries as the architecture of genuine freedom, to receive enoughness as a threshold of arrival, and to trust that the practice of limits, held with love, is among the most ancient and most needed forms of wisdom available to us in this particular moment of history. And this is the work of what Richard Rohr calls the second gaze. The gaze that has moved through the ego's first defensive reach and arrived at a wider, more compassionate seeing. From this vantage, limits become luminous. Enoughness becomes a form of abundance. And restraint, rightly understood and rightly lived, becomes one of the most powerful expressions of love available to a human being. A love offered freely in service of a world that belongs, finally, to all of us. In conclusion to this reflection portion, I want to let you know that on the Mighty Network website for our sessions, there is a post about the second gaze. So if you want to read and understand a little bit more about what Richard Rohr calls the second gaze, I did put that there at the beginning of the year. It's still there for you. So friends, take a breath. Feel that that breath is enough. That this moment right now is enough. That your being is enough. And the chat section remains open. Don't be shy. Feel free to share what's on your heart and mind. Let us remain centered and enter into a guided inquiry, a guided meditation. Let us see if we can move into a felt sense of what we have reflected on. So take a moment and feel the weight of your hands resting wherever they have landed. Feel the specific pressure of that contact, the warmth that gathers between skin and surface. Let the weight of your shoulders drop just a little, as if setting something down you have been carrying. Breathe in and breathe out. Feel the fullness of your breath, the way it arrives completely, the way the body receives it and releases it, unhurried and whole. Let's just stay with that for a moment. The breath arrives. The breath is enough. Good. Bring attention now to the felt sense of your body in your chair or floor, and notice the boundaries of your body, the places where you end and the air begins. This is a limit. The skin is a boundary. And within that boundary, something is alive and whole and present. Let yourself simply notice what it feels like to be contained, to be held within the shape of your own body right now. What does that feel like in you? Good. Now let memory come forward gently and bring to mind a time when you had enough. A meal that satisfied, a conversation that felt complete, a moment when you looked at what was before you and something settled in you quietly, and it said, "This is sufficient. This is whole." Where in your body do you feel that memory? Let that memory land somewhere specific, in the chest, in the belly, in the open palms, and simply notice the texture of that feeling, the sensation itself apart from the story. And notice, what does enough feel like in your body? Breathe into that sensation. Let it deepen. This is real knowledge. It's held in muscle and bone, older than any concept you have been taught about what you should want or how much you should need. Sit with it just a little longer. Now, let a different memory surface. A time when the reaching went past what was needed. When more felt urgent and necessary. And when afterwards you felt further from rest than when you began. A time when some limit was asking to be honored and the asking was difficult to hear. Perhaps that difficulty carried information. Perhaps the restlessness itself was pointing towards something that needed more care, that needed more space, that needed more honest attention. Where does that restlessness live in you? Is it in the throat, perhaps? The chest? The hands? Breathe into that place gently with the same openness you would offer a tired friend. What was the reaching for? And what might have become possible if the reaching had paused? And you can just let those questions rest inside you the way a stone rests at the bottom of still water. Good. Now, let a single question move through you slowly. Where in your life is a limit asking to be honored? Where is the boundary between enough and more than enough already visible to you and simply awaiting your consent? Good. Now, what would it feel like to say yes to that limit? To receive it as a form of love. Love for yourself, love for others, love for the living world that holds everything. And simply notice what opens in your body when you let that yes settle in. Good. Let sensation be the teacher here, whether it's tightening or ease, the held breath or the released one. The body already knows something about this. Your body has been practicing the wisdom of limits from the beginning. Every breath released is a practice of enoughness. Every heartbeat follows a rhythm of work and rest, contraction and expansion. The body already lives within limits, and from those limits sustains life. As we go into the silence together for a few minutes, let everything go, breathing in the grace of enough, breathing out open hands. Breathing in the grace of enough. Breathing out open hands. Let the breath return to its own rhythm. Let your awareness expand gently back to the room around you, the sounds, the light. And you can feel free to release anything that arose. It will always remain available to you. And I hope that you carry the wisdom of enough into your days to come. And may that wisdom become in your hands a form of love offered freely to all who share this world with you. Friends, limits, restraint, and enoughness are not obstacles to love and justice. They are among its most essential expressions. You see, the ego, organized by the logic of more, it mistakes accumulation for fulfillment, and it keeps reaching past what is genuinely needed. In the spiritual traditions, from Rohr's Franciscan descent to Teasdale's simplicity of life, has always known that maturity moves in the opposite direction, toward proportion, toward the unadorned, toward a trust that what is needed has already been given. So to reimagine limits as gift rather than deprivation is both a contemplative practice and a political one, because the choice to live within enough creates conditions in which others may also have enough. Restraint, rightly understood, is love made structural. Friends, in the recorded section of the Mighty Network, I will post 4 questions for dialogue. I'm going to share them with you now, and then they'll be there if you want to go back to them, and hopefully you will share some of your reflections and enter into dialogue with the rest of the group. First, where in your life have you experienced a limit as a form of liberation or love rather than deprivation? What conditions made it possible to receive that limit as gift? And next, the surrounding culture consistently rewards the logic of more. So what would it require personally and communally to organize a life or a community around the logic of enough? And what might need to be grieved or released in order for that organizing to take root? Next, Richard Rohr teaches that the ego functions as a hungry ghost, always reaching because its hunger is rooted in anxiety rather than genuine need. So where do you recognize that hunger in yourself, and what practices or experiences have helped you find rest within a boundary? And next, Wayne Teasdale names simplicity of life as a mark of genuine spiritual maturity, and Valerie Kaur insists that love must be translated into structures that either support or deny human flourishing. So how do you understand the relationship between personal restraint and justice, particularly for those whose access to enough has been structurally constrained? And if you would like to answer one or more of those now, you certainly can. As you are taking time to think about that, or to type a response or a comment if you'd like, I want to remind you that each of these sessions is recorded. The recording will be available on the Mighty Network. It's also available on YouTube. The reflection questions are only on the Mighty Network, so you can go there and review them and journal or answer them in any way you'd like to. I'll also take just a minute to share with you that tomorrow on the Mighty Network and in our newsletter, hopefully if it works correctly, there it will be a poll. We're asking for your input on how you connect with contemplative inner being through which platforms and which platform you like best and why. And then my last announcement, if you have not heard, I recently released my first book. It came from a personal exploration of music, but when I was done, I felt moved to share it, and it is titled The Sermons of a Showgirl, and you can read more about that on Amazon.com, or you can read about it on the Mighty Network. Again, whether you were here for the live session or you're watching a recording, thank you for interbeing with us. I'd like to wish you all a wonderful, wonderful evening. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Blessings and good night for now.